In 2007, Nokia sold 400 million phones, nearly half of every mobile on Earth. They had GPS, a 5-megapixel Carl Zeiss camera, true 3G, multitasking, features Apple wouldn't match for years. Engineers at Apple were buying Nokia handsets to reverse engineer them. So burn this question into your brain right now. How does the most dominant tech company on the planet collapse in under a decade? It wasn't the hardware. It wasn't Steve Jobs. The answer is something far more ordinary and far more terrifying. Let's be brutally concrete. The Nokia N95 launched just months before the original iPhone. It had 3G data, built-in GPS, a 5-megapixel Carl Zeiss camera with video recording. The original iPhone? No 3G, no GPS, no video, no flash. On paper, Nokia won. Badly. So if Nokia had the superior hardware, why are we even having this conversation? Because the war had already moved somewhere Nokia wasn't looking. Stay with me, because what killed Nokia is something every organization alive right now is vulnerable to. The war was fought on software, and Nokia's weapon was already rotting from the inside. Their operating system, Symbian, was architected in the 1990s for devices with almost no RAM. It used punishing, bizarre memory rules. Operations that failed didn't throw errors, they left. Developers had to manually push and pop pointers onto something called a cleanup stack. One mistake? Hard crash. No recovery. No error message. Just a dead phone. This wasn't quirky. It was catastrophic. And Nokia's engineers knew it. Which raises the real question. Why didn't anyone at the top? Think about what Symbian meant for the developers who had to build on it. On iPhone or Android, a compelling app took days. Standard Objective-C or Java, modern tools, clean APIs. To build the same app on Symbian? Weeks of agonizing, painstaking optimization. Standard multithreading was banned to preserve battery life. Standard C++ strings were replaced by bizarre custom objects called descriptors. Developers didn't just prefer the App Store, they fled Symbian like a burning building. And when developers leave, users follow. And when users follow, the platform dies. That chain reaction was already in motion by 2008. Here is what makes this story genuinely disturbing. Nokia knew. Researchers Vuori and Huy conducted 76 interviews with Nokia insiders for a landmark study published in Administrative Science Quarterly. What they found was not ignorance. Engineers knew Symbian was dying. Middle managers knew. The data was clear, the crisis was visible. To everyone close to the actual work. But the information never made it to the top. Not because it didn't exist, because everyone was terrified of what would happen if they said it out loud. Nokia's senior executives were known for shouting. For publicly humiliating managers who brought bad news. So middle managers learned a survival skill. Sanitize reality before it reaches the top. The Vuori and Huy study called this a bidirectional flow of fear. Executives feared looking weak to the board, so they pressured managers. Managers feared the executives, so they lied upward. The board heard only good news. The whole organization was running on a fabricated picture of itself, while the actual company was collapsing beneath them. Picture exactly how this worked. A software engineer discovers Symbian cannot compete. He tells his manager, "Crisis." The manager softens it before telling his director, "Serious challenge." The director reframes it for the VP, "Manageable risk." By the time it reaches the CEO, the existential crisis has become a footnote in a slide deck. Real problems were systematically dissolved by the hierarchy before they could trigger real action. Nokia wasn't just slow to respond, it was structurally incapable of responding. The org chart itself was the weapon that killed the company. While Symbian rotted, Nokia tried to build replacements. 2 of them. Memo and MeeGo, internal Linux-based systems that burned hundreds of millions of dollars. But here's where it becomes almost absurd. The engineering teams building them were at war with each other. One faction built a UI toolkit called Orbit for Symbian. Another built a competing toolkit called libDUI for Memo. They were completely incompatible. Neither team would back down. The result was total development paralysis. Nokia was fighting a two-front war simultaneously, against Apple and against itself. And it was losing both. By 2010, Nokia's board was desperate. They brought in an outsider, Stephen Elop, a former Microsoft executive, the first non-Finnish CEO in Nokia's history. In Finland, a theory spread fast. Elop was a Trojan horse, a Microsoft plant sent to destroy Nokia from within and hand its carcass to his former employer. It's a compelling story. It fits the emotion of the moment. But the investigative book Operation Elop, based on deep insider reporting, tells a considerably more complicated and considerably more tragic story. So which is it? In February 2011, Elop sent an internal memo that leaked within hours. He called Nokia a burning platform. Standing on a burning oil rig, he wrote, "You don't calculate the risk of jumping. You jump." He announced Nokia would abandon Symbian entirely and bet everything on Windows Phone. The memo was meant to shock the company into action. Instead, it shocked the market. Symbian phone sales collapsed almost overnight. Customers stopped buying. Why would you buy a phone the CEO just publicly declared was on fire? So was Elop a saboteur? Here is what the evidence actually shows. When Elop arrived in 2010, the internal software ecosystem was already functionally dead. Maemo and MeeGo were paralyzed by turf wars. Engineering talent was hemorrhaging. The Trojan horse theory assumes Elop destroyed a healthy system. He didn't. He arrived at a burning building, pulled the fire alarm, and got blamed for the fire. His pivot to Windows Phone was a desperate attempt to jump onto a stable modern architecture, because Nokia's own R&D had already completely collapsed before he walked in the door. The Windows Phone gamble failed. Microsoft's platform never attracted enough developers or users to compete with iOS or Android. The same developer abandonment problem, different logo. By 2013, Nokia's mobile division was bleeding so badly that Microsoft bought it for just $7.2 billion. A company that had once been worth over $200 billion. The brutal irony. Nokia's engineers had world-class hardware talent, global manufacturing scale, and distribution in every market on Earth. They had almost everything. Except the one thing that mattered most. A software platform developers would actually choose. So what actually killed Nokia? Not Apple's hardware. Not Steve Jobs. Not even Stephen Elop. Nokia was killed by a culture where fear traveled faster than truth. Where engineers who saw the crisis stayed silent because honesty was career-ending. Where internal factions cared more about winning turf wars than shipping software. Where an aging, hostile operating system was defended long past the point of reason. The hardware was never the problem. The organization was the problem. And that is a problem no product launch can fix. And here is why this story matters far beyond Nokia. Every organization has a version of this. Engineers who don't speak up because the boss shouts. Managers who polish bad news before passing it up. boards who only hear what they want to hear. Vuori Huy called it distributed fear. The intelligence existed. The crisis was visible to the people closest to the actual work. But organizational fear made that intelligence invisible to the people with the power to act on it. Nokia didn't die from ignorance. It died from a system that made honesty more dangerous than silence. Remember the question from the very first second of this video? How does the most dominant tech company on Earth collapse in under a decade? Now you know. It wasn't the iPhone. Nokia had better hardware. It wasn't one bad CEO. The rot was deep before Elop arrived. It was fear. Systematic, organizational, bidirectional fear, flowing up and down every level of a company that had made honesty structurally impossible. 400 million customers, the best hardware engineers alive. And they were destroyed by something that never appeared on a single spec sheet. If Nokia, 400 million customers, world-class engineers, global manufacturing dominance, could be destroyed by the way fear moved through its org chart, any organization can be. The lesson is not really about smartphones. It's about what happens when the people at the top make honesty more dangerous than silence. If this made you think, subscribe. Every week we dig into the real mechanics behind famous collapses, comebacks, and decisions that changed everything. The next one is already waiting for you.